As a matter of fact, one of my colleagues attempting to respond to the government, he brought props into the office, into the parliament, to demonstrate fabrication and ascribe it to me. So now, in my office as receiver of this, as opposition leader, where any citizen could feel that if something has to be known to this country, take it to the opposition. Take it to the opposition. That's what the average person does in this country, including this whistleblower. And I did not act irresponsibly, Mr. Speaker. I didn't want to spread rumor and gossip damaging to the Prime Minister and the Attorney General. I didn't want this to leak so as to damage. And on that basis, Mr. Speaker, while I'm mulling over it and treating with it, I did not share it with my colleagues because I did not want it to get in the public domain so it can become the subject of misuse and abuse. I wanted it, if it is deemed to be something that warrants attention, to be handled properly. And Mr. Speaker, when I came to the conclusion that it ought not to be dismissed as frivolous, and by the very nature of the matters involved, and by the people who are apparently involved, I sought an audience with the Mr. Speaker, I received this document at the end of the last year. I think it was just before Christmas. I spent a few days over it, Mr. Speaker, determining during that time whether in fact the email addresses. And let me tell you what I said here in the Parliament when I played it, because maybe you've forgotten. I said, Mr. Speaker, I waited for 6 months to see what would happen. I took it to mean that the package that I received was from a whistleblower. That's what I told this House. In a position to package and send me this. My first reaction was to ensure that it was not frivolous and that the whistleblower had presented to the office of the opposition information that should be taken seriously. I spent days trying to do that. And one of the things I did was to determine whether any of those emails in there, in fact, are emails that are used by the officers identified, and whether those emails are in fact active. Mr. Speaker, the feedback I got, it was yes. The bulk of the emails in here, not all the bulk, relate to emails used by the officers as the document purported. I took that to mean that there's something that I should not throw in the dustbin. And I heard, Mr. Speaker, a lot of statements by the government in defense. The government has put forward a list of defenses as to why this document should be dismissed out of hand and thrown away. And I will come to exactly what the government has been saying in the last day and a half. But let me tell you what I said when I put this thing before the Parliament and the country. I said, Mr. Speaker, the emails to me represent, and I'm to me, some addresses which are known to me, and of course in a couple of instances I do not know some of them, and there seems to be some kind of problem here and there with 1 or 2 of the addresses. But suffice it to say, I would make reference to them, 31 of them, because the vast majority of them are emails from addresses, or from emails from the following addresses, which again would be known to a wide cross-section of the country. Mr. Speaker, I think I was acting very responsibly. So I wasn't surprised at all when the government was able to identify that there was some issues with 1 or 2 of the addresses of the email. I indicated that. I saw the government saying a number of things. But the one thing I want to make clear, Mr. Speaker, I am not an investigator. And it is not my responsibility. It is not my responsibility beyond prima facie to convince, as soon as I convince myself that this might be serious, It is not for me to adjudicate upon the details as an investigator. What I had to do was to determine that this matter be investigated. That was my duty. I saw enough corroboration of some of the emails. I saw the addresses as used by others and owned up to here in the house. I knew the climate within which we lived at the time and still live, where there are unanswered matters, where the government is uncomfortable. It's an environment where the Prime Minister failed to answer the President's specific questions. That is the environment in which I saw this. So I do my job. This needs to be investigated. And of course, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister could laugh, Mr. Speaker, she could laugh. The member for Superior could laugh because a motion put in this House, a substantive motion, where allegations for both documents could be pointing directly at her, and she chooses not to enter the debate at all. The debate is winding up now. She has nothing to say in the debate, just as she had nothing to say in the Section 34 repeal. As I speak about the climate, Mr. Speaker, when we repeal Section 34, where the government in crisis acknowledged a blunder, and Section 34 generated so much heat in this country, we came to this Parliament to repeal Section 34, and the laughing Prime Minister had nothing to say. It's against that background that I thought that this should be investigated. That's the climate in which it was. And here the government. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you some of what the government is saying. Having taken a position, it's a fabrication. The government is saying, perhaps it's fabrication, it's fake, throw it away. That's the perfect answer for the government, Mr. Speaker. That means none of the contents should even be looked at a second time. Just dump it because we have determined it to be a fake. Of course, what I didn't expect, Mr. Speaker, was one member of the government to get up here and in the most emotional way point out and identify with a particular point in one of the emails and give the impression to the whole world that that position could not have been the position of a fabricator. So at least one person in the government is not of the view that this should have been dumped in the dustbin by me immediately. And Mr. Speaker, I simply want to ask, and I'm not going to ask the government because I know the answer. They appoint a man to a commission of inquiry, and the man, when he was exposed for his fraudulent conduct, tells the world that his CV is only 80% complete. And I ask you, Mr. Speaker, if he's only 80% accurate on the CV and the 20% is fabricated, which 20%? And the government does absolutely nothing. The man is still on the commission of inquiry, waiting to sign it.
Imagine.
Right? That is their record. Right? And of course, with this matter, 31 emails, one government minister who happens to have been a judge in this country, who they all call Justice Volney when it suits them, he got up here and he identified with something in those emails, which I couldn't have identified it because I wasn't there. I don't know. I just brought it forward so that the people of this country will have their own view on it. So let them tell him that it should be dumped in the dustbin. But I simply want to ask you, Mr. Speaker, one could pick holes in one or two here or there, but suppose the ones that they can't pick holes into, the content of any one of those emails is true. Because by the very nature of the content of those emails, Mr. Speaker, the government has set itself a burden to prove that every one is a fabrication, as they try to do. And I have to ask you, Mr. Speaker, suppose one of them is right. We already have the member for St. Joseph saying that he could identify with one of them. Mr. Speaker, as I was talking here that day, and I read out I didn't spend a lot of my time reading the emails, the addresses, one after the other. But when I did mention the very first email relating to the Office of Prime Minister, I spelled it out. I heard the Prime Minister saying, that is not my email. You heard it? When I spelled out that email address, I heard the Prime Minister saying, that is not my email. Later on, I heard the Prime Minister at a press conference saying that it was her email and it was her. I also heard the Attorney General saying throughout his presentation that ANAN@gmail.com is not his email. But of course, I have to excuse him at that point in time because he didn't have sight of the document to see that on most of the occasions in the document, the cut and paste document, where somebody put a package of emails together, some complete, some incomplete, that on virtually every instance, the reference was made to the Gmail account and the TSTT account. And I took careful note of the fact that the government and its spinners are making no effort to identify with the emails of the Attorney General at tst.net.tt, but are confining themselves to the fact that ANAN@gmail.com cannot exist. Mr. Speaker, I am saying I am not here pretending to be any IT expert, except to say it is not a defense sufficient to dump this document for somebody to say I don't have a Gmail account because Gmail only has to have 6 characters or more. Mr. Speaker, I have 4 email addresses. 4. One, which I use for my personal private business by talking and working with people. I have one for my constituency office business. I have one for parliament business, and I have another which is pretty much dormant. And if anybody knows about those 4 email addresses, it is possible for them to send me an email and put the 4 addresses out there. And when it comes up, right, Mr. Speaker, one of them may not be operational on that day, and the others, right, if they want to make sure that I get it, and they know of all 4, they can send all 4. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, my very first email address, my very first email address goes back to the very beginning of the availability of emails in this country. And some things may change on that. I am not here investigating and determining in this house, right, what this is. But I'm saying to you, Mr. Speaker, if one looks at the very beginning of the characters used in the Gmail account, when it started in 2004, it was possible then to have an email address with 4 characters. And if you keep that email address, that Gmail address, you could still operate it. In 2005, I think it was, in 2005, because of the problems with Gmail at the time, and with those 4 characters, they changed, Mr. Speaker, in January 2005, Gmail changed. And since then, you cannot, as I've been saying, you cannot now start a new account, a Gmail account. So you may have had it before, I don't know, I'm not saying you did, I'm saying, but to come here and say, and to go on TV and put up postal and say, you could never have.
Members, I know this house is becoming a bit heated, but let us have some calm and let us observe the standing orders. Continue, Honorable Leader.